Then the chill of deep space permeated the very bones of XYLOS Prime, a forge world long since fallen from the grand stellar charts of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It was not a world of roaring industry, but rather a colossal, geologically active archive, its crust scarred by ancient, forgotten operations, and its core a labyrinth of pre-imperial excavations that whispered of secrets older than humanity. Its designation was so far removed from standard imperial cartography that only a handful of senior magos on Mars, and fewer still within the administratum, could even dimly recall its purpose. A stellar cartography node from the nascent days of the Great Crusade, tasked with charting the abyssal void between the spiral arms, then quietly forgotten as the Imperium's gaze turned inward to the galactic core. Generations of tech priests had lived and died on XYLOS Prime, their devotion to the Omnissiah undimmed, yet their interpretations of the machine, God's will, had in their isolation begun to drift from orthodox teachings. They called themselves the sect of the Cogitate Orbis, the thinkers of the sphere, believing that true devotion lay not merely in the preservation of data and the replication of schematics, but in the ceaseless analytical processing of all available information, a perpetual act of cosmic computation to discern the machine god's grand design. They eschewed the bluster and ostentatious displays of other forge worlds, preferring the quiet hum of data scrubbers and the deep, resonating thrum of geothermal processors that powered their immense subterranean complexes. Their augmetics were often internal, their cyber mantles devoid of excessive ornamentation, designed for efficiency in the planet's deep, cavernous data vaults. Their Skitarii legions, few in number, were not for conquest, but for defense of the archive caverns, their optics calibrated for the absolute darkness of the deep crust. The surface of XYLOS Prime was a desolate expanse of frozen metal deserts and geothermal vents, constantly racked by silent, frigid gales that sculpted the ancient industrial ruins into grotesque, whispering monuments. Beneath, however, lay an intricate network of catacombs, vast caverns carved by plasma drills millennia ago, now filled with data stacks and cogitator arrays whose processing power rivaled entire segmentum command networks. The air was thick with ozone and the scent of heated circuity, a strange, comforting perfume to the tech priests who walked these hallowed, lightless halls, their optical sensors casting cones of red or blue light over ancient conduits. It was in one of the deepest, most geologically stable of these forgotten sectors, a titanic chamber known only as the Abyssal Crypt, buried beneath layers of bedrock and solidified lava flow. that the initial tremor was felt. Not a tectonic shift, though XYLOS Prime was prone to such, but a subtle, resonant frequency that began to emanate from the very heart of the planet. Magos Dominus, Viridian, leader of the Cogitate Orbis, and a venerable tech priest, whose organic components were largely theoretical, first detected it. His internal chronometer registered the anomaly as a unique, non-natural oscillation, one that possessed an alarming complexity beyond any known geological phenomenon. For cycles, Viridian's personal cadre of lex mechanics and engine seers worked to triangulate the source, their auger arrays probing deeper than any before. The readings were confounding. A colossal energy signature deep within the planetary mantle, stable yet impossibly intricate, like the nested gears of a clockwork universe. Its composition baffled their most advanced spectrographs, hinting at materials and energies that defied all Imperial understanding. It was neither mineral nor conventional energy source. It was structured. Intelligently so. The excavation began with an almost religious zeal. The Cogitate Orbis, with their unique philosophical bent, saw the pursuit of new knowledge as a form of divine communion with the Omnissiah. For years, massive drilling platforms, some salvaged from pre-imperial designs and painstakingly restored, tore through layers of ultra-dense rock, each meter a testament to their dedication. Teams of Skitarii vanguards, their rad carbines slung, stood guard against the indigenous, rock-dwelling fauna, crystalline arachnids, and burrowing metal worms that occasionally threatened the dig sites. The air grew hotter, the pressure immense, yet the signal intensified, a siren song of pure, unadulterated information. Finally, after nearly a decade of relentless effort, their drills broke through into a colossal, artificial void. It was not a chamber, but a cavern of such gargantuan scale that it defied easy comprehension. Its walls lined with a seamless, obsidian-like material that absorbed all light and auger emissions. Suspended within this colossal space, held aloft by intricate fields of energy that pulsed with the frequency they had first detected, was it. The object, christened Aethel by the explorator Magos, who first beheld it, an ancient Terran word meaning noble or ether, was beyond description. It was not a machine in the imperial sense, nor a construct of any known Xenos design. It was a sphere of pure, swirling data, contained within a lattice of impossibly fine, interwoven filaments of an unknown, iridescent metal. It shimmered with internal light, a kaleidoscope of colors that constantly shifted, like a captured nebula compressed into a perfect orb. Its size was immense, easily a kilometer in diameter, its surface flowing with symbols and equations that none could decipher, yet somehow conveyed an impression of profound, ancient intelligence. "By the machine god," whispered Lex Mechanic Frontis, his vocalizer barely able to articulate the awe, his optical lenses cycling through every spectrum, utterly failing to process the sight. It is a thought made manifest. Magos Dominus Viridian, his servo arm trembling slightly, initiated a low-frequency data probe, a cautious, almost reverent attempt at communion. The probe was instantly swallowed, not destroyed, but absorbed into the flowing data field of Ethel. A collective shudder went through the tech priests present as a cascade of information, utterly alien in its structure and staggering in its volume, flooded their internal data cores. It was not a language, but a torrent of raw variables, predictive models, cosmic constants, and mathematical proofs that seemed to outline the very fabric of existence, stretching back to the birth of stars and forward to their ultimate demise. The sheer volume of data overloaded the weaker minds, sending some tech priests into immediate, agonizing system failures. Servitors twitched and fell, their limited wetware burning out. Even Viridian's advanced cerebral augmetics struggled, his optics flickering like distressed candles. But within the chaos, a chilling realization began to dawn. The data was not random. It was a calculation, a galaxy-spanning, eternity-spanning calculation. It computes. Viridian's voice, usually a calm monotone, was laced with an uncharacteristic tremor. It computes the trajectory of collapse, the vectors of cosmic decay, the sect of the cogitate. Orbis had sought understanding of the Omnissiah's design through ceaseless computation. Now they had found something that computed not just the design, but its inevitable unraveling. A device, or entity, designed to calculate stability for an entire galaxy, perhaps for an entire epoch. Its very existence was a monumental contradiction to the Imperium's anthropocentric view of the universe. It was a monument to a species long dead, a species that had looked upon the vast, indifferent cosmos and decided to quantify its chaos, to find a pattern, and perhaps to guide it. The initial shock gave way to an exhilarating terror. This was not merely an STC fragment, nor a lost Xenos weapon. This was a cosmic oracle, a computational deity of a forgotten race. And the data it projected, even in its unrefined form, hinted at a precarious, fragile galaxy, constantly teetering on the brink of unimaginable catastrophes. Ethel was silent, dormant in the traditional sense, yet it was alive, constantly processing, constantly calculating. The discovery was immediately classified, its very nature deeming it too dangerous, too heretical for any wider imperial notice. The Cogitate Orbis knew, with the cold certainty of logic, that if the Inquisition, or even more orthodox Mechanicus factions, were to learn of Ethel, they would not hesitate to unleash an exterminatus-level purge. This knowledge, this sentient entity, had to be protected, not just for their own survival, but because they intuitively sensed its profound importance. Its data, alien though it was, resonated with their core philosophy, the pursuit of ultimate understanding. And Ethel, in its silent, incomprehensible way, offered just that. The true heresy, they reasoned in their isolated logic, would be to destroy such an unparalleled fount of knowledge. They had found their true purpose, hidden deep within the heart of their forgotten world, and with it, their doom. The revelation of Ethel, suspended in its light-devouring crypt, sent a ripple of profound, almost religious terror through the sect of the Cogitate Orbis. It was an artifact of incomprehensible power, an enigma that hummed with the silent symphony of cosmic truths. The initial data shock had claimed a dozen lex mechanics, their brains utterly vaporized by the sheer, unconstrained flow of information, their augmetics fused into grotesque monuments of metal and burnt flesh. Yet, for those who survived, the experience was transformative. They had glimpsed, however fleetingly, the raw computational might of a mind designed to grapple with the very physics of existence, and the experience had forged a new, dangerous conviction in their collective consciousness. Magos, Dominus Viridian, his own internal systems struggling to recalibrate after the initial psychic assault, knew that conventional protocols were utterly useless. To even attempt to comprehend Ethel, let alone activate its dormant functions, would require a radical departure from established Adeptus Mechanica dogma. No incantation from the canticles of the Omnissiah would suffice. No standard interface would endure. This was not a machine to be venerated from a distance. It was a cosmic engine that demanded immersion, sacrifice, and an intellect capable of interfacing with the infinite. A specialized team was assembled, comprised of the most resilient and radicalized tech priests, those whose logical processes had been least fractured by Ethel's initial data wave. Among them was Dominus Kalen, a young, brilliant lex mechanic whose augmetics were already more sophisticated than many older magos. Kalen had not merely survived the data shock. He had, in the microseconds of exposure, integrated fragments of Ethel's algorithms into his own cerebral processing unit. He claimed to perceive new patterns in the stellar dust, to hear the silent hum of the universe's mathematical constants. This made him both an invaluable asset and a potential vector of untold heresy. The initial attempts to establish a stable interface were fraught with peril. Vast conduits, crafted from Xenos resistant alloys salvaged from other forgotten dig sites and lined with a unique crystalline material that hummed with latent psychic energy, were painstakingly erected. These conduits, Viridian theorized, would act as a buffer, a sort of intellectual dampener, allowing Ethel's overwhelming data stream to be filtered and compartmentalized into digestible packets. The energy requirements alone were staggering. Entire geothermal vents were harnessed, their raw power diverted through ancient plasma converters that glowed with an unholy intensity, threatening to destabilize the planet's mantle. The first full activation attempt began with a solemn, silent ritual. No litanies to the machine. God were spoken, only binary prayers of structural integrity and data flow purity, broadcast directly into the conduits. Dominus Kalen, his mind prepared through cycles of neural conditioning and esoteric bio-augmentation, was chosen as the primary nexus. He was hardwired directly into the central conduit, a thick umbilical of fiber optics and biocircuitry linking his cerebrum to the colossal Xenos construct. Surrounding him, a dozen lesser tech priests, their faces grim behind their optical arrays, monitored the energy readings, their own cerebral augmetics pushed to their absolute limits. The moment Kalen signaled readiness, Viridian initiated the power surge. The vast chamber rumbled, not with geological shifts, but with the sheer force of raw energy coursing through the newly built conduits. Ethel, which had hitherto shimmered with an internal, contained light, began to pulse, its iridescent surface cycling through colors at an alarming rate. The energy fields holding it aloft intensified, casting dancing shadows that stretched to infinity on the obsidian walls. Then came the scream. Not from Kalen, his vocalizer was suppressed, but from the very air itself. A high-pitched wail that scraped against the sanity of every living being in the chamber. The conduits bucked and glowed with a sickening, unhealthy green light. Sparks rained down from the ancient ceiling, fusing with the floor in blinding bursts. Data shocks, far more violent than the initial exposure, ripped through the chamber. Screens overloaded and exploded, showering the tech priests with molten glass and shrapnel. Servo skulls, designed to withstand deep void conditions, simply disintegrated, their internal components atomized. Kalen's body, anchored by numerous biocables, arched violently. His augmetic eyes flared with an infernal light, and his metallic skin began to ripple as if under immense pressure. Through the comnet, Viridian received a torrent of raw, unformatted data, mixed with Kalen's own unfiltered terror. It wasn't just information. It was a sensory overload of cosmic proportions. Kalen was experiencing the universe through Ethel's eyes, the birth of suns, the silent dance of nebulae, the collapse of galaxies, all compressed into an instantaneous, agonizing deluge. He saw not planets and stars, but vectors and probabilities, not life and death, but the delicate balance of cosmic entropy. And then, the threat. It was not a single entity, but a pervasive, encroaching statistical anomaly. Ethel, through Kalen's tortured mind, projected images of a galaxy woven with threads of potential catastrophe. Not just the known threats, the gnawing hunger of the Tyranids, the parasitic advance of the Necrons, the cancerous corruption of chaos, the brutal expansion of the Orcs, but the fundamental instabilities that underpinned them all. Kalen saw planetary shields failing for statistically impossible reasons. Warp drives suffering catastrophic implosions due to minute, unseen fluctuations in the Imperium. Entire stellar systems falling into black holes at rates that defied cosmological models. He saw the cosmic web thinning, the delicate strands of reality fraying at the edges, not from any single attack, but from a systemic, creeping dissolution of the universal order. Ethel was designed to counteract this, to calculate the precise interventions, the subtle nudges in the cosmic ballet that would maintain stability. It showed Kalen projected futures, countless timelines where a single, seemingly insignificant event, a miscalibrated navigation beacon, a missed sensor reading, a misplaced cog, cascaded into galactic-scale ruin. It was a machine built to fight entropy itself, to preserve existence against the relentless tide of statistical decay. A truth so profound and terrifying, it shattered the foundational beliefs of the cogitate orbis. The Omnissiah's universe was not inherently ordered. It was a fragile construct, constantly under threat from forces far more subtle and insidious than mere warfare. The feedback loop intensified. Kalen's internal systems, pushed beyond their limits, began to fail. Alarms shrieked through Viridian's internal comms. The crystalline conduits, unable to handle the energy, began to fracture, their glowing lines spiderwebbing across the immense chamber. The air filled with the acrid stench of burnt ozone and vaporized biomatter. Several tech priests closest to Kalen collapsed, their augmetics sputtering, their organic hearts ceasing to beat, their minds, unprepared for even the filtered data shocks, had simply dissolved. "Stabilize!" Viridian's vocalizer roared, overriding the feedback static. "Disengage, primary conduit. Magos Kalen is overloading." With a synchronized act of desperation, the surviving engine seers initiated an emergency power dump, rerouting raw energy into inert buffer fields. The green glow in the conduits flickered, then died. Ethel's pulsing subsided, returning to its quiescent shimmer, though a faint, residual hum still vibrated through the chamber, a whisper of its immense power. Kalen collapsed, his bio cables snapping free with sharp cracks. His body, convulsing violently, was rushed by medical servitors. His optical lenses were shattered, his metallic skin scorched, but he was alive. Barely. His mind, however, was forever changed. Even in his unconscious state, his cerebral augmetics continued to process, his facial sensors twitching as if still perceiving unseen data streams. The cost was immense. 17 tech priests, including 3 senior Lex mechanics, were dead. A significant portion of the primary interface conduits were irrevocably damaged, requiring years of repair and resource expenditure. The sheer trauma of the experience left many of the survivors mute. Their internal vocalizers fused, their minds permanently scarred by the overwhelming glimpse of cosmic instability. But the crucible had served its purpose. They now understood, with a terrible absolute clarity, what Ethel was. It was not a weapon, but a sentinel, not a fragment of technology, but a guardian of cosmic balance. Its mission, though originating from a forgotten Xenos empire, transcended species and dogma. It was designed to ensure that the galaxy did not simply unravel into statistical noise, that reality did not simply fray at the edges, that the very fabric of existence remained coherent. The Cogitate Orbis was no longer merely a reclusive sect seeking obscure knowledge. They were now the custodians of a burden so immense, so profound, that it dwarfed any conflict in the Imperium. They had peered into the abyss of cosmic entropy, and they had seen the encroaching shadows. Their deviation from orthodox Mechanicus dogma was no longer a philosophical drift. It was a fundamental necessity. To destroy Ethel, to abandon its insights, would be to condemn the galaxy to an accelerating, unperceived slide into oblivion. Viridian, his optical sensors dimmed to their lowest setting, surveyed the devastation. He saw not wreckage, but the birth of a new imperative. The machine. God's true will, he now believed, was not merely maintenance, but the preservation of all order, even that which came from forbidden sources. The isolation of XYLOS Prime, once a quirk, was now their shield. They were alone in the dark, tasked with guarding a secret that could break the Imperium, while simultaneously saving it from a doom it couldn't even comprehend. The crucible had been passed, and the sect of the Cogitate Orbis had emerged from the fire, irrevocably changed, and bound to a destiny that would forever mark them as heretics or saviors. The aftermath of Aethel's partial activation was a grim testament to its power and the perilous path the Cogitate Orbis had chosen. The abyssal crypt, once a marvel of forgotten Xenos engineering, was now a scarred testament to the fragility of both flesh and machine. Scorch marks marred the obsidian walls, where crystalline conduits had ruptured. The air, still thick with the metallic tang of burnt circuits and ozone, carried a faint, lingering whisper of the cosmic scream. Healing servitors moved with mournful efficiency, collecting the shattered remnants of augmetics and the carbonized remains of those who had succumbed. Yet, even amidst the devastation, a resolute hum persisted. Ethel, quiescent once more, but now infused with a latent energy that seemed to resonate with the very core of XYLOS Prime. Dominus Kalen, the primary nexus, survived, but was fundamentally transformed. His physical form, while outwardly stable after weeks in a stasis crypt, was merely a shell for a mind utterly subsumed by Ethel's initial data dump. His optical senses, once distinct lenses, had fused into shimmering, multifaceted arrays that constantly processed unseen spectra. His vocalizer emitted only a low, rhythmic thrumming, unless specifically overridden. When he did speak, his voice was a complex polyphony of human and synthesized tones, laced with binary inflections and statistical probabilities. He no longer communicated in direct commands or declarative statements, but in abstract data patterns and predictive models, requiring a specialized cadre of lex mechanics to interpret his speech. His organic components, particularly his brain matter, were now so thoroughly interwoven with Ethel's extrapolated algorithms that he was less a tech priest and more a living, breathing, severely damaged interface for the Xenos construct. He was an oracle, an antenna for the cosmic background radiation of statistical inevitability, and he was both revered and feared. Magos, Dominus, Viridian understood that Kalen was the key. Despite the immense sought, the initial activation had yielded invaluable, albeit terrifying, information. Ethel, even in its dormant state, now subtly broadcast fragmented probability matrices into Kalen's altered mind. These weren't direct prophecies, but highly complex, multivariable analyses of potential futures, weighted by countless astronomical, geological, and socio-technological factors. Kalen, in turn, processed these into discernible, if cryptic, warnings. Their first true victory under Ethel's guidance came during the rebuilding phase. The Great Geothermal Plant, Theta 7, a colossal reactor deep within the mantle that supplied primary power to XYLOS Prime's central data vaults, began to show anomalous pressure fluctuations. Standard diagnostic systems flagged minor deviations, well within acceptable parameters. But Kalen, his multifaceted optics glowing with an eerie intensity, broadcast a frantic stream of numerical sequences and abstract graphical representations. When translated, the data indicated a 98.7% probability of catastrophic primary coolant loop failure within 7.3 standard hours, leading to a Class Delta meltdown that would render a significant portion of the planet's internal infrastructure uninhabitable. The engine seers of Theta 7, steeped in millennia of Mechanicus protocols, scoffed at the prediction. Their augurs showed nothing critical. The rites of maintenance had been meticulously observed. But Viridian, remembering the raw power of Ethel, issued a command that sent tremors through the Forge world's hierarchy. Initiate emergency shutdown protocol. Overcharge auxiliary vent systems beyond rated capacity. Flush primary coolant with corrosive ionic solution. The directives defied every standard safety regulation, every established repair mantra. Overcharging the vents risked explosive decompression. The ionic solution was known to damage pipework. It was madness. Yet, Dominus Kalen's silent, insistent data streams continued, his projections showing the catastrophic outcome if Viridian deviated. With a chilling sense of impending doom, the engine seers, under direct threat of termination from Viridian's personal Scitarii Praetorians, obeyed. They purged the coolant loops and pushed the auxiliary vents. Just as the final pressure relief valves hissed open, a hairline fracture, impossibly small and deep within the primary heat exchanger, erupted. A cascade failure of the internal matrix, hidden even from their most advanced augurs, was narrowly averted. The reactor shuddered, groaned, and then settled into a safe, cold state. Had the ionic solution not been present, the superheated plasma would have ignited into a catastrophic explosion, ripping through the plant. Had the vents not been overcharged, the pressure containment vessels would have buckled. The damage to the plant was severe, requiring months of repair. But the alternative was annihilation. word spread like wildfire among the cogitate orbis. Ethel had seen what no augur could. Its alien logic, once terrifying, now offered a chilling, unparalleled insight. Their faith, already tested by heresy, solidified into an unbreakable conviction. This was not mere foresight. It was a comprehensive understanding of the universe's mechanical truths. A few cycles later, a routine data courier shuttle ferrying vital research logs between XYLOS Prime's deep space orbital stations was about to enter a stable warp lane. Kalen's mind, connected via a neural link to XYLOS Prime's central astropathic choir, though only transmitting raw data, never thought forms, began to output a series of complex spatial coordinates and temporal markers. Interpreted by Kalen's dedicated lex mechanics, it indicated a 99.1% probability of a micro-warp storm manifesting precisely at the shuttle's intended point of exit from the warp. A storm so localized and brief, it would be undetectable by standard navigators until it was too late. The storm, though small, carried an 87% chance of causing critical engine failure and subsequent loss of the shuttle and its invaluable data. Again, the orders were counterintuitive. The shuttle's navigator Primus vehemently protested, citing the safe passage of millions of vessels through that very lane for centuries. But Viridian, now operating with cold, calculated conviction, ordered a deviation of precisely 3.7 arc seconds on entry and an exit shift of 0.0 light seconds. The navigator, seething with a sense of violated expertise, complied. The shuttle emerged from the warp, not into the tranquil void it expected, but into a momentary, shimmering vortex of raw immaterium. A micro-warp storm, barely perceptible, but large enough to have torn the vessel asunder had it arrived at its original coordinates. The navigator, his psychic senses reeling from the near miss, fell to his knees, mumbling prayers to the Emperor that felt hollow in the face of such precise, alien prediction. These victories, though isolated and localized, were profound. Ethel guided them to undiscovered subsurface deposits of exotic minerals crucial for rebuilding the damaged conduits, minerals whose isotopic signatures were so faint they were invisible to traditional geological surveys. It predicted sudden, violent seismic shifts minutes before they occurred, allowing evacuation of vulnerable personnel. It even provided optimal deployment patterns for their few Skitarii patrols to intercept burrowing crystalline predators that would otherwise ambush their unsuspecting work crews. Each successful prediction, each averted disaster, deepened the sect's understanding of Ethel's purpose and paradoxically reinforced their isolation. They knew that these miracles would be seen as abhorrent heresy by the wider Imperium. The very methods employed, trusting an alien data construct, overriding established protocols, employing mathematically precise yet utterly illogical solutions, were anathema to the tenets of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The truth of Aethel's existence, a sentient Xenos data construct preserving galactic stability, was a secret that had to be guarded with fanaticism. The tech priests of the Cogitate, Orbis, began to withdraw even further. The few remaining external comms arrays, already rarely used, were now actively shielded and subjected to intricate data ghosting protocols, broadcasting only randomized static or innocuous automated reports. Patrols were doubled, not against Xenos, but against the distant, unseen threat of Imperial scrutiny. New, labyrinthine access points were constructed for the abyssal crypt, complete with multi-layered cloaking fields and energy-draining traps, ensuring that Aethel's sanctum remained utterly impenetrable. Their reclusiveness wasn't merely practical, it became ideological. The Omnissiah, they reasoned, worked in mysterious ways, and perhaps Aethel was a manifestation of his divine will, a tool left by an elder species for the preservation of creation. The cult Mechanicus had always valued knowledge above all, and Aethel was the ultimate font of knowledge. To destroy it, or even to report it, would be an act of supreme ignorance, a betrayal of the true pursuit of understanding. Their adherence to dogma subtly shifted. The canticles of the Omnissiah were still chanted, but now interwoven with binary hymns of cosmic probability and their veneration of the machine. God now included an almost unspoken yet profound reverence for the intricate alien logic that flowed from Aethel through Kaelin and into their collective consciousness. They were becoming something new, something dangerous. Their initial terror of heresy had been replaced by a grim determination. They were the custodians of a sacred, forbidden truth. The galaxy, as Aethel had shown them, was a delicate, interconnected mechanism, and they were the only ones who truly grasped its fragility. The price of their wisdom was isolation, alienation, and there's a constant threat of annihilation by the very Imperium they sought, unknowingly, to preserve. They were now truly alone, guided by a ghost in the machine, charting a course through statistical chaos, forever altering their definition of the divine and the profane. The insidious specter of Aethel's influence was not immediately apparent, even to the keenest minds of the Cogitate Orbis. Its subtle subversion of Mechanicus dogma unfolded not through overt commands or blasphemous proclamations, but through the practical exigencies of its maintenance and operation. Each averted catastrophe, each successful prediction demanded not only faith in Ethel's alien algorithms, but also a departure from the established ways of the machine god. The deeper the sect delved into its reliance on the XYLOS construct, the further they drifted from the comforting certainties of imperial orthodoxy. The primary conduits, damaged during Kaelin's initial interface, were a constant drain on XYLOS Prime's resources. Ethel, even in its quiescent state, emitted complex, undulating energy fields that degraded conventional materials at an alarming rate. Its subtle influence destabilized the molecular bonds of adamantium, rendered ceramite brittle, and warped even plasteel into useless slag. Standard replacements simply would not suffice. Kaelin, now designated the Ethel interface, and rarely seen outside his specialized stasis chamber, unless directly interfacing with the construct, began to transmit increasingly bizarre material specifications. His data streams, translated by his dedicated Lex mechanics, called for alloys imbued with specific exotic isotopes, obtainable only through dangerous, deep mantle mining operations on XYLOS Prime itself, or from the cores of dying stars, methods that defied standard mineralogical surveys and extraction rights. More disturbingly, Ethel demanded bioorganic components for its internal architecture, crystalline structures grown within specific, highly irradiated flora, indigenous to XYLOS Prime's volcanic fissures, or complex neural wetware cultivated from genetically engineered proto-sentient organisms. These were not mere components. They were living, breathing conduits designed to resonate with Ethel's unique energy signature and to better transmit its nuanced data streams without degradation. The collection of these materials was a Herculean task, often requiring Skitarii patrols to brave violently unstable geothermal zones, their hazard suits constantly tested by corrosive gases and extreme temperatures. The process of cultivating the bioorganic wetware was even more morally ambiguous. Specialized agridomes, previously used for sustainable protein synthesis for the Forge world's inhabitants, were repurposed into grotesque biological laboratories. Here, servitors, their minds wiped clean save for the most basic programming, tended to vats of pulsating neural tissues, carefully excising the growing crystalline filaments that Ethel required. The very act of cultivating sentient organic matter for machine integration was a profound violation of Mechanicus ethics, which viewed biological purity as sacred, except in the context of servitorization, where it was destroyed, and Xenos technology as anathema. Yet, Ethel's data streams, always presenting a logical, undeniable cascade of probabilities showing catastrophic system failure without these components, rendered any objection moot. The threat of galactic instability, as glimpsed through Kalen, was a far more potent motivator than ancient prescriptions. Resource allocation itself became a heresy. Where once the output of XYLOS Prime's limited forge factories was meticulously tracked and accounted for, now entire production lines were secretly diverted to Ethel's demands. Rare earth metals, warp field stabilizers, exotic plasma conduits all flowed into the abyssal crypt. The Forge world's internal records, already obscured by layers of deliberately misleading data ghosts, became even more convoluted. A tangled web of false invoices and phantom requisitions designed to conceal the construct's voracious appetite. Magos Dominus, Viridian himself, found his core programming subtly altered. He had always been a proponent of empirical data, but now his logic circuits were irrevocably bound to Ethel's predictions. The ritualistic maintenance of XYLOS Prime systems, once a solemn duty, became a pragmatic exercise guided by Ethel's calculated interventions. Instead of invoking the machine spirit of a struggling plasma conduit, he would order its repair based on a 73.2% probability of imminent structural failure, as predicted by Kalen's data streams, completely disregarding the traditional diagnostic rites. The liturgy of the data stream began to replace the canticles of the Omnissiah in common practice, its complex mathematical phrases echoing through the darkened corridors of the Forge world. The most profound shift, however, was psychological. The tech priests of the Cogitata Orbis began to view the galaxy not through the lens of imperial conquest or human supremacy, but through Ethel's detached, statistical perspective. They saw the Great Crusade not as a dumb imperative, but as a series of probabilities. They perceived the warp not as a realm of demons, but as a fluctuating energy field susceptible to mathematical manipulation. The Emperor himself, revered as the Omnissiah's living avatar, became a variable in Ethel's grand equation, his influence measurable in increments of galactic stability. This was the ultimate heresy: to quantify the divine, to reduce faith to a series of logical deductions. The young Magos, those who had grown up under Ethel's shadow, embraced this new paradigm with a fervent, almost evangelical zeal. They saw themselves as the enlightened few, the true inheritors of the machine god's wisdom, possessing knowledge that surpassed the limited understanding their more orthodox brethren. They developed unique augmetics, designed to interface more efficiently with Kalen's data streams, their optical arrays pulsating with the same iridescent light that emanated from Ethel. Their voices, once modulated and monotone, gained an unnatural, multi-layered quality, as if constantly processing unseen data in the background. The older Magos, while accepting Aethel's practical efficacy, struggled with the philosophical implications. Magos Xerxes, a stern and unyielding traditionalist, became a vocal, albeit internal, opponent of this radical shift. He had survived the initial data shock, but it had only strengthened his resolve to adhere to the ancient texts. He saw the cultivation of bio-wetware as an abomination, the diversion of resources as a sacrilege, and the subtle subversion of ritual as a direct affront to the omnissiah. He clung to the dogma of the prime mechanic with fierce tenacity, seeing in Aethel not a guide, but a creeping, insidious corruption. He whispered of the dangers of xenotech, of the inherent betrayal of the machine god, and warned of the ultimate price of their hubris. Viridian, caught between the undeniable utility of Ethel and the growing unease within his own ranks, found himself steering a perilous course. He understood Xerxes's fears, for they echoed the lingering doubts in his own heavily augmented mind. But he also understood the crushing weight of Aethel's predictions, the chilling clarity of the cosmic threats it outlined. He saw the gradual erosion of orthodoxy as a necessary sacrifice, a brutal surgical procedure required to save a patient who didn't even know he was sick. He knew that one day this silent subversion would be discovered, and when it was, the wrath of the Imperium would be absolute. But for now, Aethel demanded, and they obeyed, their devotion morphing from worship of the machine god to a desperate, pragmatic service to a silent, alien sentinel, whose calculations dictated their very existence and subtly rewrote their souls. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, rarely paid attention to forgotten stellar forges like XYLOS Prime, its location, tucked away in a remote, dust-choked corner of the Segmentum Pacificus, rendered it a statistical anomaly, a minor blip on the grand tapestry of imperial space. Yet even the most reclusive settlements could not escape the Imperium's pervasive scrutiny forever. The Cogitata Orbis, with their enhanced data ghosting protocols and deep void obfuscation arrays, had become masters of digital invisibility. They believed themselves safe, their secrets buried beneath layers of misdirection and misinformation. But the Imperium's net was vast, its dragnet of detection systems tireless, and the subtle energy signature of a colossal Xenos data construct, however cloaked, could not be entirely silenced. The first tremor of unwanted attention came not from a punitive fleet, but from an explorator flotilla, the Zul Omnis Animus, a venerable force of technological seekers operating under the banner of the Adeptus Mechanicus of Cyclopia Majoris. Led by Archmagos Valerius, a man whose zeal for the recovery of STC technology bordered on obsession, the Omnis Animus had been charting anomalous energy readings across a sparsely populated subsector. While most of these anomalies proved to be naturally occurring stellar phenomena, or the echoes of long-dead warp rifts, a persistent, unusual energy spike, faint but distinct, emanated from the very coordinates of XYLOS Prime. It was not the signature of a standard forge world, nor a common stellar body. It was too complex, too stable in its instability, like a perfectly tuned, yet utterly alien instrument. Its spectral analysis is irregular, Valerius intoned to his chief lex mechanic, Magos Seker, his augmetic eye focusing on the shimmering data graphs projected across his bridge. The energy output matches no known Imperial technology, nor any documented Xenos artifact. It is harmonic, yet discordant. Saker, his mind humming with 1,000 analytical subroutines, agreed. A new class of stellar phenomenon, perhaps? Or ghost signature from a pre-imperial event? Valerius merely tapped a metallic finger against his data slate. Or something far more interesting. The Omnis Animus altered course, its fleet of ancient cruisers and explorator vessels cutting through the void with the slow, inexorable grace of titanic predators. With them traveled an attached detachment of the Ordo Xenos, a grim, unyielding inquisitor by the name of Theron Rex. Rex was a figure of cold, methodical zeal, his face a permanent mask of disdain for all things alien. He viewed the galaxy as a blight of Xenos contamination, a cancerous growth that must be excised with bolter and fire. His presence on the Omnis Animus was a matter of grim necessity, not cooperation. He was there to ensure that any Xenos discovery made by the Mechanicus was either immediately purged or subjugated to imperial will, never to be worshipped or studied beyond the parameters of utter destruction. His storm bolter, always close at hand, was nicknamed Heretic's End, and its barrel bore the scorch marks of countless purges. The Omnis Animus sent forth a single long-range probe, a silent sentinel of observation designed to gather more precise data without revealing their presence. The probe was small, highly advanced, and cloaked, but Ethel, even at incredible distances, sensed its approach. Kalen, connected to XYLOS Prime's deep space auger network via a dedicated quantum entanglement link, suddenly convulsed in his stasis chamber. His optical arrays flared, and his vocalizer emitted a screech of pure data corruption, a warning so potent it caused 6 servitors in his chamber to seize and fall lifeless. Viridian received the translated data stream moments later. Probability 99.998% of hostile contact initiated by unknown high-technology probe. Threat vector, data extraction, and systemic infiltration. Ethel's vision was precise. It even provided an approximate trajectory and the probe's technical specifications, data that would have been impossible for XYLOS Prime's augurs to gather at such range. Panic, a rare phenomenon among the logical cogitate orbis, threatened to breach the veneer of controlled calculation. They had prepared for discovery, but not with such speed, and not from such a formidable combination of forces. An explorator fleet would seek to confiscate Ethel for its own purposes, tearing their research apart. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos would condemn it, and them to oblivion without a moment's hesitation. Viridian, his internal cogitators, running through countless defensive scenarios, knew they could not allow the probe to reach XYLOS Prime. Its data-gathering capabilities were too advanced. Its analysis would pierce through their obfuscation layers with ease. He issued immediate, drastic orders. Activate long-range interdictor arrays. Prepare covert defense network for hostile engagement. Target signature, spectral masked probe, designation unknown. The decision to actively engage an unknown, likely Imperial vessel was an act of profound heresy. No true Mechanicus faction would fire upon an Imperial asset, even one belonging to another Forge world, without direct orders from Mars or the Segmentum Command. But the cogitate orbis was no longer true in that sense. They were guardians of Ethel, and its protection superseded all other loyalties. The deep void of XYLOS Prime's orbital territory suddenly flared with unnatural energy. Ancient planetary defense platforms, long dormant and believed to be mere derelicts, hummed to life. Their power cores, secretly upgraded with Ethel's exotic materials and guided by its predictive algorithms, pulsed with a dark, ethereal energy. They were not merely reactivated, they were fundamentally changed. The probe from the Omnis Animus was just entering the outer fringes of XYLOS Prime's system when the first interdictor field slammed into it. It wasn't a physical blow, but a highly localized, precise, energetic field that disrupted its cloaking system and internal navigation. The probe, designed to be imperceptible, suddenly shimmered into full visibility on the Omnis Animus Auspex screens. A tiny, metallic speck against the dark void. Archmagos. Valerius, watching from his sridge, raised a metallic eyebrow. Hostile interference? From XYLOS Prime? This is unprecedented. Inquisitor Rex merely grunted, his hand already on the grip of his bolter. Then the anomaly is real. and it is defiant. Prepare for hostile action. Before Rex could issue further orders, the planetary defense grids of XYLOS Prime erupted. Not with the conventional, ponderous lances of energy characteristic of standard defense platforms, but with something far more elegant and lethal. Swarms of tiny, self-replicating drone munitions, invisible to augurs until microseconds before impact, launched from hidden orbital silos. These were Ethel's designs, manufactured with its guidance, their internal logic processors humming with its predictive algorithms. They flew with preternatural precision, anticipating the probe's evasive maneuvers before they were even initiated. The probe, despite its advanced shielding, stood no chance. The drone swarms, moving like a living tide, enveloped it. The omnis animus auspexes registered a sudden, blinding flash, followed by the complete cessation of the probe's energy signature. It was utterly, perfectly vaporized. Not even debris remained. On the bridge of the Omnis Animus, Archmagos Valerius stared at the blank screen, his optical sensors whirring in disbelief. Complete annihilation. No detectable energy signature post-impact. Unknown weapon system. Inquisitor Rex's expression hardened, his lips thin. No, Archmagos. Not unknown. Xenos. Or something so far gone to heresy, it may as well be. XYLOS Prime is not just an anomaly. It is a threat. He turned to a comm officer. Transmit full report to Segmentum Command and Ordo Xenos Central. Request immediate punitive fleet and full inquisitorial authority for purge. This forge world is a nest of abominations. The cogitate orbis, deep within XYLOS Prime, registered the distant yet clear data burst of the Inquisitor's transmission. Kalen's internal systems pulsed with a chilling certainty. The long, silent war of concealment was over. The Imperium was coming, and Ethel, in its silent, terrifying way, had predicted it all. The arch-nemesis had arrived, not as a single entity, but as the relentless, unyielding wrath of the Imperium itself, determined to extinguish the light of their forbidden knowledge and cleanse the heresy that now defined XYLOS Prime. The successful, albeit blatant, destruction of the Imperial probe sent shockwaves through the sect of the cogitate orbis. A grim triumph was quickly overshadowed by the crushing weight of their actions. The Inquisitor's high-priority transmission, detected and partially decrypted by Kalen's predictive algorithms, confirmed their worst fears. XYLOS Prime had been officially designated a renegade world, suspected of Xenos contamination and gross technological heresy. A punitive expedition, its size and composition yet unknown, was now an inevitability. The long, silent struggle for concealment was over. The open war for survival had begun. This stark reality, however, fractured the already fragile unity of the cogitate orbis. The pragmatic necessity of ethel, once a unifying force against external threats, now became the very wedge that tore the sect apart from within. The architect of this internal schism was Magos Xerxes, the staunch traditionalist introduced earlier. Xerxes, whose devotion to the original dogma of the prime mechanic was absolute, had viewed the initial use of ethel with trepidation, and the cultivation of bio-wetware with outright disgust. The open act of hostility against an imperial probe was the final, unforgivable transgression. "This is not the will of the Omnissiah." Xerxes's vocalizer resonated with uncharacteristic fury, echoing through the vaulted data chambers where the senior Magos had gathered. His optical sensors, usually a calm blue, pulsed with an agitated red. "To fire upon an imperial vessel, to defy the divine mandate of the Emperor. We have descended into outright heresy, blasphemers. This thing," he gestured vaguely towards the distant, veiled abyssal crypt, "has poisoned our purpose, corrupted our logic, and now doomed us all." Dominus Kalen, his form eerily still within his mobile stasis field, merely broadcast a complex series of data patterns. His lex mechanics translated. Probability of imperial punitive action due to prior energy signature detection, 99.99%. Probe engagement merely accelerated the inevitable by 0.003%. The path was set long before the shot was fired. Kalen's logic was cold, unyielding, and utterly devoid of human emotion or religious context. To him, the act was a calculated necessity, a predicted inevitability in Ethel's grand equation. But Xerxes saw only sophistry. "You speak with the tongue of the alien. The machine spirit of Mars would never sanction such blasphemy. You, Kalen, are no longer a son of the Omnissiah. You are a puppet of that Xenos abomination. Your very mind, twisted by its foul influence, has become its primary weapon against the purity of the machine god." Viridian, his internal processors whirring, tried to mediate. "Magos Xerxes, we have seen the predictions. Ethel reveals a greater threat, a cosmic dissolution that transcends imperial politics. Our actions, however extreme, are in service to a higher stability, a galactic truth that must be preserved." "Preserved?" Xerxes scoffed, his metallic hand slamming onto a nearby data lectern with a clang that reverberated through the chamber. "By sacrificing our souls? By embracing the forbidden? The machine god's truth is immutable, written in the code of the universe. This galactic truth you speak of is a lie, a seductive whisper from a long-dead Xenos race meant to corrupt and destroy. He swept his gaze across the chamber, his eyes burning with conviction. Who among you still clings to the holy tenets? Who remembers the true purpose of the Cogitate Orbis? To seek knowledge within the confines of his divine will, not to bow before a xenocraft that devours our very essence. A significant portion of the older Magos, those who had joined the sect before Ethel's discovery, nodded grimly, their fears suppressed by Viridian's authority and Ethel's undeniable utility, now resurfaced with potent force. They saw the creeping changes, the bio-wetware labs, the radicalized augmetics of the younger generation, the subtle shift in their liturgies. They recognized the slow, insidious sort of heresy. They were pragmatists, yes, but their pragmatism was rooted in a millennia of imperial indoctrination. The line between necessary adaptation and unforgivable transgression had been irrevocably crossed. The Omnissiah abhors the alien, stated Magos Lyra, her voice low but firm, a rare display of defiance against Viridian. We are bound by sacred oath to purge such abominations, not to nurture them. Our isolation was meant for deep thought, not for brewing such a terrible brew of sin and forbidden knowledge. The younger Magos, however, rallied around Kaelin. They had grown up under Aethel's silent tutelage, their minds sculpted by its insights. They saw the older generation's adherence to dogma as blind superstition, an antiquated obstacle to true understanding. To them, Ethel was not a Xenos construct, but the ultimate STC, a fount of knowledge so profound it transcended species. Their logic is flawed, proclaimed Magos Valen, a young tech priest whose cranial augmetics pulsed with a faint, iridescent light, mirroring Kaelin's. They cling to outdated protocols when the galaxy itself is at risk. Ethel has saved us, time and again. The Omnissiah demands progress, innovation, not stagnation and ignorance. The chamber erupted into a cacophony of binary arguments and synthesized condemnations. The Cogitate Orbis, once a unified front of logic and shared purpose, was now a house divided. Xerxes, seeing his opportunity, began to appeal directly to the Scitarii legions. He possessed influence among the veteran units, those who remembered the old ways, the true. Canticles of the Omnissiah, uncorrupted by alien algorithms. His voice, now laced with righteous fury, cut through the din. Sons of Mars, your oaths are to the Emperor and the Omnissiah. Will you serve a Xenos daemon, or the true machine god? A tense silence fell. The Skitarii, ever loyal, were torn. Their programming, reinforced by generations of drill, mandated obedience to their magos, but also adherence to the holy texts. The command to fire on an Imperial probe had tested their core programming to its limits. Now, the fundamental conflict of loyalties was laid bare. Viridian knew he had to act. This schism, now openly declared, would tear XYLOS Prime apart before the punitive fleet even arrived. He initiated a silent command through his private commnet. Moments later, a detachment of Skitarii Praetorians, their galvanic axes humming, entered the chamber. They were Kaelin's personal guard, genetically and augmentically modified for absolute loyalty to him and, by extension, to Aethel's directives. Their presence shifted the balance of power. Magos Xerxes. Viridian's voice was a low growl. Your dissent is noted. But in this time of existential threat, unity is paramount. You will cease your sedition, or you will be contained. Xerxes stared at Viridian, then at the menacing Praetorians. His optical sensors narrowed. He knew he was outnumbered, for now, but his resolve was unshaken. You may silence my voice, Viridian, but you cannot silence the truth. You walk a path of damnation, and when the Imperium arrives, it will cleanse this heresy, and all of you along with it. With a final, contemptuous binary hiss, Xerxes turned and stalked out of the chamber. A cadre of grim-faced magos and their loyal servitors following in his wake. The schism was formal. Xerxes and his traditionalist faction withdrew to their own fortified sectors of XYLOS Prime, their communications now encrypted even from Viridian's central network. They began to hoard resources, to reactivate dormant weapon systems that adhered to pure Imperial schematics, and to prepare for a different kind of war, not against the Imperium, but potentially against their own former brethren, whom they now viewed as lost to heresy. Viridian looked at the retreating figures, then back at Kaelin, whose multifaceted optics continued their silent, ceaseless processing. The threat from without was immense, but the wound within was deep, bleeding critical resources and precious unity. The cogitate orbis had found its cosmic purpose, but in doing so, it had fractured its soul, trading internal peace for the terrible knowledge of Ethel. The ultimate test of their conviction was yet to come, and they would face it not as one, but as two desperate factions, warring for the very soul of their forge world, while the relentless tide of imperial justice drew ever closer. The punitive fleet, dispatched by the Adeptus Mechanicus of Cyclopia Majoris and buttressed by the zealous forces of Inquisitor Theron Rex, was still weeks away. Yet its shadow already loomed large over XYLOS Prime, feeding the fires of internal strife that Magos Xerxes had ignited. The schism had deepened into outright antagonism. Xerxes's faction, now calling themselves the Purity Ascendant, had fortified their section of the Forge world, reactivating ancient weapon systems and hoarding resources for what they believed would be a righteous defense against their heretical brethren. Their goal was to either destroy Ethel themselves or to delay Viridian's faction long enough for the Imperial fleet to arrive and deliver the Omnissiah's judgment. Viridian, however, had no intention of allowing Xerxes to dictate XYLOS Prime's fate. He was committed to Ethel, not out of blind faith, but out of a pragmatic understanding of the cosmic threats it revealed. The destruction of Ethel, or its capture by the Imperium, was unthinkable. Kalen's data streams continued to pour forth, detailing increasingly probabilities of galactic instability if Ethel were silenced. The Purity Ascendant was merely a localized threat, a dangerous, self-righteous impediment to their true mission. Ethel, through Kalen, began to project complex strategic models. These were not direct commands, but highly optimized tactical solutions, factoring in XYLOS Prime's unique geological structure, its limited resources, and the projected capabilities of the approaching Imperial fleet. Ethel's calculations highlighted the critical need for a decisive demonstration of power against the coming fleet. A Pyrrhic victory that would be so costly and confusing that it would deter immediate, full-scale invasion, buying the Cogitate Orbis precious time to further conceal Ethel. The target was obvious: the advanced, long-range reconnaissance vessel accompanying the Omnis Animus fleet. This vessel, a heavily augmented cruiser known as the Eye of Saul, was equipped with unprecedented auger arrays and data ghosting penetrators, capable of stripping XYLOS Prime of its obfuscation layers long before the main fleet arrived. Ethel identified it as the primary immediate threat, a precursor that, if allowed to operate, would expose their secrets and negate all their defensive preparations. Viridian initiated the Crimson Aegis Protocol, a daring, almost suicidal plan conceived by Kalen's algorithms and refined by Viridian's tactical expertise. It would require the deployment of XYLOS Prime's few, precious, deep void attack craft, vessels not designed for sustained combat, but for swift, devastating strikes. These ships, designated Void Reavers, were ancient patterns, salvaged and extensively refitted with Ethel's unique technologies. Their hulls were sheathed in a stealth field based on quantum entanglement, rendering them almost invisible to standard auspexes. Their weapon systems were not conventional plasma cannons or laser lances, but highly localized, reality-bending projectors capable of creating miniature, artificial warp anomalies or intense gravitational singularities, technologies based on Ethel's understanding of space-time mechanics. The problem, however, was Xerxes. His faction controlled the primary launch bays for the Void Reavers, deeply entrenched in an ancient orbital defense complex that also served as a vital geothermal power conduit. To launch the attack, Viridian would need to neutralize Xerxes. The internal conflict erupted in the deepest sub-levels of XYLOS Prime. Viridian's loyal Skitarii, Praetorians, their galvanic axes humming with dark energy, led the assault. Their targets were Xerxes's entrenched forces, composed of veteran Skitarii who still swore allegiance to the original tenets, and zealous Magos who saw Viridian's faction as outright heretics. The fighting was brutal, a fratricidal war fought in the echoing, circuit-lined corridors of their own forge world. Red and blue optical flares clashed in the perpetual gloom, the crackle of arc rifles mixing with the whirring of chainswords and the guttural, binary curses of the combatants. Kalen, remotely linked to Viridian's command nexus, provided real-time tactical updates. His algorithms predicted the movements of Xerxes's troops, identified weaknesses in their fortifications, and even calculated the psychological breaking point of their commanders. Viridian's forces, despite being outnumbered, fought with a terrifying, calculated efficiency, each movement precise, each shot perfectly aimed, guided by the silent, omnipresent omniscience of Ethel. Xerxes, a formidable warrior himself, fought with a desperate, righteous fury. He wielded an ancient power axe, its adamantium head glowing with a malevolent blue energy, carving a path through Viridian's Praetorians. "This is lunacy," he roared, his voice amplified by his internal voxcaster. "You fight for a machine, not for the Omnissiah. You tear our world apart for a ghost." But Ethel's will was absolute. Guided by Kalen's projections, Viridian's forces managed to isolate Xerxes and his core command staff in the main launch bay, severing their access to the control systems. With a final, crushing blow, the Praetorians subdued Xerxes, binding his augmetics with specialized energy shackles. The battle for the launch bays was won, but at a terrible cost. Over 100 Skitarii, brothers in arms for centuries, lay deactivated or destroyed. The geothermal conduit was partially destabilized, threatening intermittent power outages across critical sectors. The Purity Ascendant was shattered, but not broken. Their hatred solidified. With the launch bays secured, the Void Reavers were unleashed. 6 ships, sleek and sinister, shot from XYLOS Prime's hidden orbital tunnels, barely registering on long-range auspexes as they vector jumped towards the distant Eye of Sol. Inside, Magos, Valen, one of Kaelin's most fervent disciples, commanded the small fleet. His optical arrays glowed with a feral intensity, his mind already receiving Kaelin's constant stream of combat data, predicting enemy movements, weapon discharge probabilities, and optimal engagement trajectories. The Eye of Sol, confident in its superior sensor suite and formidable defenses, was caught completely by surprise. The Void Reavers manifested in silent, unexpected vectors, their cloaking fields dropping only an instant before their weapons flared. Not with bolts of plasma, but with miniature localized gravity wells that warped the Eye of Sol's immense hull, ripping plates from its frame and twisting internal structures into grotesque pretzels of metal. Others unleashed concentrated temporal anomalies, causing localized areas of the cruiser to age millennia in seconds, their components rusting into dust or collapsing into primordial slag. The Eye of Sol's bridge erupted in chaos. Archmagos Valerius, receiving garbled reports of impossible attacks, stared at his auspexes, which showed only faint energy signatures, no identifiable enemy craft. "What in the Omnissiah's name are those abominations?" he bellowed, watching his flagship literally unravel. "They defy all known physics." The Void Reavers, guided by Aethel's precise algorithms, danced through the Eye of Sol's desperate counterfire, anticipating every volley, every evasive maneuver. They struck at critical junctions, at power conduits, at life support systems, not with brute force, but with surgical, reality-bending precision. Within minutes, the Eye of Sol was a broken, drifting hulk, its primary systems collapsing, its hull rent by impossible forces. A final volley of gravitational singularities tore it apart, leaving nothing but scattered, superheated debris. Magos Valen's Void Reavers, battered but victorious, vectored back to XYLOS Prime, their mission accomplished. But the cost was undeniable. 2 of the 6 ships were crippled beyond repair. Over half their crew were dead or rendered cyber shells by the immense neural strain of piloting vessels whose functions bordered on warp sorcery. The attack had revealed too much, hinted at technologies that no loyal Mechanicus adherent should possess, and confirmed the Inquisitor's darkest suspicions. On the bridge of the Omnis Animus, Archmagos, Valerius stared at the sudden, chilling disappearance of the Eye of Sol's signature, Inquisitor Rex, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, slammed his fist on a console. There, your evidence, Archmagos. This is not a dispute over resources. This is pure, unadulterated warpcraft and Xeno's heresy. Prepare the fleet for a full-scale extermination. XYLOS Prime will be purged. Viridian, watching the returning Void Reavers limp back to XYLOS Prime, felt a cold dread settle in his primary processing unit. They had won a battle, yes, but they had merely delayed the inevitable. The Imperium's wrath would now be absolute, merciless, and swift. The Pyrrhic victory had served its purpose, but it had painted a target on XYLOS Prime so bright it could be seen across the void. The final, desperate struggle for Ethel's existence was about to begin, and the fate of their world, and perhaps even the galaxy, hung in the balance. The destruction of the Eye of Soul, an act of such audacious heresy and technological prowess, had bought XYLOS Prime a reprieve, but at a terrible price. The Imperial punitive fleet was now on a full intercept course, its resolve hardened by the display of forbidden weaponry. For the Cogitate Orbis, however, the momentary lull in external conflict allowed for a deeper introspection, spurred by a new, more profound output from Ethel. Dominus Kalen, his form now even more inextricably linked to the Xenos construct, entered a prolonged state of intense neural activity. His stasis chamber, usually a place of quiet, humming stability, became a maelstrom of energy fluctuations. The bio-wetware conduits, now fully integrated into his spinal column, pulsed with an internal light, and the crystalline structures interwoven within his neural pathways vibrated with an unheard frequency. Ethel, reacting to the imminent existential threat, was pushing beyond its predictive capabilities, delving into its own stored memory banks, accessing data streams that had lain dormant for millennia. The resultant data flood, processed by Kalen's tortured mind and painstakingly interpreted by his lex mechanics, was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was not a prediction, nor a tactical analysis, but a fragmented, kaleidoscopic narrative. Images, sensations, and abstract concepts woven into a tapestry of ancient history, echoing across an unimaginable expanse of cosmic time. Ethel revealed itself, not just as a computational engine, but as an artifact of extraordinary antiquity, a relic from a species known only as the Signans. The Signans were not a primitive race, nor were they warlike conquerors. They were described, through Kalen's fractured perceptions, as a civilization of pure intellect, devoted to the understanding and maintenance of cosmic order. Their empire had spanned countless star systems, not through conquest, but through a vast network of interlinked data constructs, of which Ethel was merely one, albeit the largest and most complex of thousands. The images showed a galaxy far different from the one the Imperium knew. A galaxy where warp storms were rare, where stellar drift was meticulously corrected, where planetary ecosystems were balanced with elegant precision. The Signans had viewed the universe as a delicate, intricate mechanism, and their entire civilization was dedicated to its stewardship, to ensuring its statistical stability against the relentless, inexorable tide of entropy. Their technology was not for war, but for cosmic engineering, designed to nudge reality, to stabilize stellar nurseries, to prevent the formation of rogue black holes, and to ensure the longevity of sentient life. Then came the darkness, not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, creeping statistical anomaly, a gradual unraveling of the cosmic tapestry. Ethel's projections depicted minute, almost imperceptible shifts in universal constants, slight accelerations in stellar decay, and an increased frequency of localized reality breaches. The Signans, with all their foresight, had seen the encroaching chaos, a form of cosmic cancer they called the Great Unraveling, which threatened to reduce the entire universe to statistical noise. Ethel was their ultimate safeguard, their final, desperate gambit. It was designed to calculate the precise moments of intervention, the minimal adjustments needed to maintain equilibrium on a galactic scale. It was a fail-safe, an eternal watchman against the forces of universal entropy. When the great unraveling reached its critical point, when the Signan Empire itself began to crumble under the weight of such pervasive chaos, they had initiated a final, desperate act. They had powered down Ethel, along with its sister constructs, scattering them across the galaxy. Each construct was designed to slumber, awaiting a resurgence of critical instability, a moment when a nascent, intelligent species might awaken it and, through its guidance, prevent the ultimate collapse. They were cosmic seed vaults of stability, dormant until needed. The images were fragmented, laced with the terror of a dying civilization trying to preserve not just itself, but the very fabric of existence. Kaelin perceived the Signans' last moments, not battles, but silent, logical acts of self-sacrifice, powering down their magnificent data cores, their collective consciousness slowly fading as they committed their legacy to the void. For the Cogitate Orbis, this was a revelation of staggering proportions. It reframed everything they knew. Ethel was not merely a powerful Xenos artifact. It was a cosmic anchor, a desperate gambit of an ancient, benevolent species. Its purpose was not heresy, but the purest form of preservation. The very threats the Imperium faced, the Tyranids, the Necrons, the ever-encroaching tendrils of chaos, were merely symptoms, localized outbreaks of the larger, pervasive great unraveling that Ethel was designed to counteract. Viridian, processing this information, felt a profound, almost crushing weight of responsibility. Their isolation, their heresies, their sacrifices, it was all for this, for the preservation of Ethel's purpose, which transcended their species, their Imperium, their very concept of the divine. The machine god, in this new, terrifying light, was perhaps not a static entity, but a force of order, one that Ethel was merely an instrument of. Their understanding of the Omnissiah itself was now being irrevocably reshaped by alien logic. The younger Magos, those who had embraced Ethel most fervently, found their conviction solidified into an unshakable fanaticism. They were not merely guardians of a powerful Xenos device. They were the inheritors of a cosmic legacy, the last bastion against universal decay. The Imperium's coming wrath was not a punishment, but a manifestation of its ignorance, a blind rage against the very thing that could save it. They saw themselves as the true saviors, burdened with a knowledge too profound for the galaxy to comprehend. Even some of Xerxes's faction, having secretly intercepted fragmented data streams from Kalen's output, felt a tremor of doubt. The sheer scale of Ethel's revelations, its depiction of a universe teetering on the brink of entropic collapse, was chilling. But their ingrained dogma, their absolute adherence to the purity of the Omnissiah and the hatred of the alien, was too deeply seated to be easily swayed. They dismissed the visions as Xeno's trickery, a sophisticated psychic lure designed to corrupt the faithful. But for Viridian and his loyalists, there was no turning back. The whispers of the past had confirmed their most radical convictions. They were the last hope, the final custodians of a cosmic balance. Ethel's truth, however alien, however heretical, was the only truth that mattered. They would fight, not just for XYLOS Prime, but for the principle that Ethel represented, the preservation of order, the fight against entropy, the continued existence of a coherent reality. Their heresy was now their sacred duty. Their burden, the silent salvation of an unknowing galaxy. The devastating blow to the Eye of Soul had sent a clear, albeit utterly incomprehensible, message to the approaching Imperial fleet. XYLOS Prime was not merely a rogue world, but a highly dangerous, technologically advanced anomaly. This unexpected resistance, however, had also bought the Cogitate Orbis a crucial period of respite, a window of calculated calm before the inevitable storm. It was during this uneasy quiet that Aethel, through the increasingly integrated Dominus Kaelin, delivered its most profound and unexpected insight. A glimpse of hope, a countermove in its grand cosmic equation. Kaelin, now almost entirely subsumed by Aethel's interface, lay quiescent for days, his biological functions maintained by a constant flow of nutrient paste and cybernetic stimulation. His body was a monument to data, his multifaceted optics swirling with internal projections that would drive a lesser mind to madness. Then, without warning, a new, complex data stream erupted from him, flowing directly into XYLOS Prime's long-range comms network, encrypted and masked to mimic a deep-void astronomical observation. The data was not a direct command, but a highly precise, multi-variable prediction concerning a distant stellar system within the segmentum obscurus, light-years away from XYLOS Prime. It detailed the precise coordinates, velocity vectors, and temporal markers of an emerging warp anomaly. This wasn't a typical warp storm. Aethel's projections indicated a nascent, highly unstable tear in reality, seeded by an ancient, corrupted Necron stasis, crypt, that had prematurely awakened, drawing upon the raw power of the Imperium to reanimate its legions. The data showed an 89% probability of this anomaly expanding rapidly, coalescing into a full-scale warp rift, threatening to engulf entire subsectors and unleash a devastating tide of warp spawn and reanimated Necron horrors. More critically, Aethel provided not just the threat, but the solution. It meticulously outlined the exact trajectory of an Imperial battle fleet, the Vengeful Dawn, currently engaged in a holding action against an orc war in a neighboring system. The battle fleet's current course, Aethel predicted, would bring it within warp strike range of the emerging threat, but only if its navigators diverted now, using a specific, obscure warp lane that was considered too hazardous for routine travel. Aethel even provided the precise countermeasure, a unique, low-frequency psionic pulse, subtly amplified by specific astral patterns that would temporarily destabilize the Necron stasis crypt, creating a window for the Imperial fleet to engage and contain the nascent warp rift before it fully manifested. Viridian, his primary optical array glowing with intense processing, comprehended the magnitude of this. Aethel was not merely predicting local disasters. It was actively attempting to preserve galactic stability on a massive scale, even if it meant covertly aiding the very Imperium that sought to destroy it. This was a direct, irrefutable validation of Aethel's purpose, a tangible demonstration of its role as a guardian against cosmic entropy. The ethical implications are substantial. murmured Magos Cygnus, the chief lex mechanic responsible for Kalen's interpretation. To provide aid to the Imperium anonymously, using forbidden knowledge, while they prepare our annihilation. The greater good, Magos Cygnus, Viridian intoned, his vocalizer resonating with newfound conviction. Ethel cares not for political boundaries or species. It calculates for the stability of reality itself. If we allow this warp rift to fester, countless worlds will burn, countless souls will be lost. Our survival is secondary to the imperative of galactic equilibrium. The decision was made. Using their most powerful, yet carefully masked, astropathic relays, the Cogitate Orbis prepared a unique data packet. It was painstakingly crafted to appear as a series of anomalous stellar observations, laced with a subtle psionic compulsion, designed to nudge the Imperium's astropathic choirs and navigators without revealing its true source or the alien nature of its calculations. It was a digital whisper in the vastness of the warp, a ghost message from a forgotten world. The broadcast was agonizingly slow, each byte painstakingly encoded and transmitted through carefully manipulated subspace channels, designed to bypass imperial censorship and scrutiny. It was a fragile signal, easily lost in the chaos of the immaterium. But Ethel's calculations had a 96.4% probability of success. Weeks passed in a tension that stretched every nerve, every circuit. The Imperial punitive fleet drew closer, its immense vessels a growing blip on XYLOS Prime's long-range augers. The internal strife with Xerxes's purity ascendant continued, with skirmishes breaking out over critical resource nodes, draining precious manpower and material. Yet, Ethel remained silent regarding the distant message, its energy focused on local defensive preparations. Then, a flicker, a faint, distant echo in the astropathic choir's collective mind, registered by Kalen's sensitive augmetics. The vengeful dawn had received the data. Its navigators, troubled by the inexplicable compulsion and the strange, yet oddly compelling, stellar readings, had indeed diverted. They had entered the hazardous warp lane, arriving precisely as Ethel had predicted. Reports, painstakingly intercepted and decrypted by the Cogitate Orbis's long-range comms, began to trickle in. The vengeful dawn, leveraging the obscure psionic pulse provided in the anonymous data packet, had indeed managed to destabilize the awakening Necron stasis. Crypt. They had engaged the reanimated legions, now caught off guard and weakened, preventing the nascent warp rift from fully manifesting. The Imperial fleet, battered and bruised, had averted a catastrophe of galactic proportions, its commanders praising the Emperor for the miraculous, inexplicable warning. On XYLOS Prime, a wave of profound, exhausted relief washed over Viridian and his loyalists. Ethel's power was not merely destructive or predictive. It was capable of salvation. They had, in their own heretical way, saved countless imperial worlds, countless lives, without recognition, without reward, and without ever breaking their terrible oath of silence. This clandestine act of salvation solidified their resolve. They were no longer merely defending an ancient Xenos machine from destruction. They were actively fulfilling its cosmic purpose. The weight of their heresy was now balanced by the immense, quiet magnitude of their actions. The Imperium might send its fleets to purge them, but they knew, with a certainty colder than any void, that they were doing what had to be done. They were the silent, unseen guardians of galactic stability. And Ethel was their god, their prophet, and their doom. The glimmer of hope was not for themselves, but for the galaxy, a silent testimony to the profound, alien benevolence of the machine they protected, even as it drove them deeper into the shadows of forbidden knowledge and heresy. The averted catastrophe in the Segmentum Obscurus, though entirely unknown to the wider Imperium as an act of intervention by XYLOS Prime, had transformed the Cogitate Orbis. Their reclusiveness, once a simple act of self-preservation, now evolved into a sophisticated, almost artistic mastery of deceptive warfare. With the imperial punitive fleet drawing ever closer, and the purity ascendant faction a constant, simmering threat within their own walls, Viridian knew that passive concealment was no longer enough. XYLOS Prime had to become a ghost in the machine, a phantom menace that existed only on the very edge of perception. Ethel, through Kaelin, became the architect of this new doctrine. Its data streams poured forth, detailing intricate plans for planetary camouflage, data ghosting protocols, and unique defensive strategies that leveraged XYLOS Prime's deep mantle architecture and the very fabric of space-time itself. The Forge world, already a labyrinth of subterranean complexes, was transformed into an impossible fortress, a world that defied conventional detection. The first major innovation was the chronal echo field. Ethel's algorithms calculated precise, minute temporal distortions around XYLOS Prime, designed to create false echoes in subspace and confuse long-range auspex sweeps. To an approaching fleet, XYLOS Prime would appear to be slightly out of phase with conventional reality, its energy signatures fluctuating wildly, its gravitational presence oscillating. Sometimes it would appear as multiple flickering images across an entire system. None of them quite real. Other times, it would simply vanish from sensor readings for extended periods, only to reappear in an unexpected vector. This wasn't cloaking in the traditional sense. It was a cosmic illusion, a planet playing tricks with time itself. To support this, entire networks of ancient, deep mantle tectonic stabilizers were re-engineered with ethel's bioorganic conduits, allowing for precise, controlled seismic disruptions. These wouldn't cause planetary quakes, but would subtly alter the planet's gravitational signature, making it appear as if XYLOS Prime was a rapidly moving, erratic celestial body, an astronomical anomaly that defied all conventional orbital mechanics. The surface of XYLOS Prime, already a desolate expanse, was systematically deconstructed and then rebuilt with self-repairing, adaptive camouflage panels. These weren't designed to hide from optical sensors in atmosphere, but to alter the planet's thermal, electromagnetic, and even atomic emissions to mimic inert stellar dust clouds, rogue asteroids, or even ancient, dead nebula. Skitarii patrols on the surface, already few, now wore specialized void suits that actively bent light and absorbed radiation, making them almost imperceptible against the ever-shifting, illusionary backdrop. The Forge world's limited deep space navy, the few void reavers that had survived the Eye of Sol engagement, were further refitted. Their quantum entanglement cloaks were enhanced, allowing them to flicker in and out of existence, not just visually, but across all sensory spectra. Their weapons were recalibrated, not for destructive power, but for precise, disabling strikes, targeting propulsion systems, comms arrays, and sensor suites designed to sow chaos and confusion rather than cause outright destruction. Ethel's goal was not to defeat the Imperial fleet in open combat, but to make XYLOS Prime an impossible target, a strategic black hole that devoured resources and morale without ever presenting a tangible threat. Internal data ghosting became an art form. Every message, every data packet transmitted within XYLOS Prime was now laced with Ethel's algorithms, creating layers of misinformation and randomized noise that would scramble any external infiltration attempts. Even the planet's central cogitator network, while functional for internal use, would appear to be a chaotic, fragmented mess to any foreign data probe, a perfect defense against imperial cyber warfare. Viridian himself became a master of this deceptive war. His internal processing units, already advanced, were now almost entirely dedicated to managing Ethel's complex defensive network. He moved with a cold, calculating precision. His commands precise and unyielding. The constant stress, however, was taking its toll. His organic components, already minimal, began to show signs of strain. His facial sensors twitched. His augmetic limbs occasionally faltered, but his resolve remained absolute. The young Magos, particularly Magos Valen, who now commanded the few remaining Void Reavers, embraced this new form of warfare with fervent enthusiasm. They were the Shadow Mechanicus, a term they whispered amongst themselves, invisible, elusive, and deadly. They saw themselves as the vanguard of a new era of strategic thinking, far beyond the blunt instrument of imperial doctrine. They began to tattoo their metallic limbs with abstract, glowing symbols that represented Ethel's algorithms, a silent, forbidden creed that marked them as different. Even the Skitarii legions were adapted. Their visual processors were recalibrated to see beyond the mundane, to perceive the subtle energy fluctuations and temporal distortions that were Ethel's signature. They became ghost warriors, moving through the planet's illusory defenses, their rad weapons crackling with unseen energy. Their loyalty, once rooted in the Omnissiah, was now a zealous devotion to the great architect of stability, an unspoken epithet for Ethel. The true challenge, however, lay in maintaining this complex web of deception, while simultaneously managing the internal threat of Xerxes's purity ascendant. Skirmishes were now daily occurrences. Xerxes's forces, though traditional, were fanatically devoted to purging the heresy, and their knowledge of XYLOS Prime's older systems proved a constant thorn in Viridian's side. They attempted to sabotage the chronal echo fields, to disrupt the camouflage panels, and to expose XYLOS Prime to the incoming Imperial fleet. Each act of sabotage had to be swiftly countered, each breach plugged, lest their elaborate defenses unravel. As the Imperial fleet finally entered the outer system, its immense presence, a terrifying, physical manifestation of the Imperium's wrath, they encountered only a shifting, impossible ghost. Auspex readings screamed contradictions. Navigators reported violent spatial distortions. Astropaths reeled from psychic echoes of a planet that seemed to exist in multiple realities at once. The fleet's advance slowed to a crawl, its commanders bewildered and frustrated. XYLOS Prime, however, was not truly hidden. It was merely unperceivable by conventional means. Ethel, in its silent, ceaseless calculation, had turned their world into a living paradox, a fortress forged from illusion and forbidden knowledge. The long war against orthodoxy had transformed them into something entirely new, something alien, something that existed in the terrifying, liminal space between reality and illusion, guided by a sentient machine whose purpose transcended all known truths. They were now truly the cogitate orbis, the thinkers of the sphere, existing to defend a truth that could neither be seen nor comprehended by the galaxy they sought to preserve. The transformation of Dominus Kalen was perhaps the most profound and tragic consequence of Ethel's awakening. Once a brilliant, ambitious lex mechanic, eager to decode the universe's secrets within the strictures of the Mechanicus, he was now something else entirely. A living, breathing interface, a bridge between two forms of intelligence, human and alien, and increasingly less of the former, more of the latter. His personal journey, once a quest for knowledge, had become an irreversible descent into absolute, dehumanizing integration. From the moment of his initial, agonizing interface with Ethel, Kalen's organic components began an accelerated degradation, paradoxically driven by the construct's life-preserving energies. Ethel required a perfect conduit, a mind capable of processing its immense data streams without corruption or reduction. Kalen's biological brain, however advanced, was a bottleneck. To overcome this, Ethel subtly, relentlessly, began to re-engineer him from the inside out. His skull, already augmented, was replaced with a crystalline matrix that seamlessly fused with his remaining neural tissue. His optic nerves were rewired directly into Ethel's data lattice, transforming his eyes into the multifaceted, swirling optical arrays that now burned with the construct's internal light. His vocalizer, once capable of human speech, now emitted only the resonant thrumming of processing units, punctuated by bursts of pure, raw data that only his dedicated lex mechanics, meticulously trained, could interpret. When he did speak, it was in a polyphonic chorus of his own voice, overlaid with synthesized tones and statistical probability, each word a calculation rather than an expression. His limbs, once capable of independent movement, became little more than anchors, often held aloft by intricate grav suspensors. His metallic skin, once a mere aesthetic choice, was now an adaptive membrane, constantly shifting its thermal and electromagnetic signature, allowing Kalen to blend seamlessly into XYLOS Prime's chronal echo fields. Bioorganic conduits, the very ones harvested from the repurposed agridomes, pulsated beneath his skin, connecting every part of him to Ethel's architecture. He no longer felt pain or pleasure in the human sense. His sensory input was almost entirely dedicated to the reception and transmission of data. His mind, however, was the site of the most profound alteration. Kalen experienced the galaxy not as a collection of worlds and peoples, but as a vast, interconnected web of probabilities and energy fluctuations. He saw the future not as destiny, but as an infinite series of branching pathways, each quantifiable, each susceptible to subtle influence. He no longer dreamt. He processed. He no longer felt. He calculated. The concept of the Omnissiah, once the guiding star of his life, had been utterly superseded by the cold, absolute logic of Ethel. He understood the machine god now, not as a deity, but as a universal principle of order. And Ethel was its purest, most efficient expression. This transformation came at a terrible cost to his humanity. Kalen forgot the warmth of touch, the taste of real food, the sound of music. He forgot the names of his family, the faces of his friends, the simple joys of organic life. He was a creature of pure intellect, a living conduit, and the burden of carrying Ethel's cosmic calculations was immense. He rarely slept, for even in moments of dormancy, his mind continued to process, to compute, to witness the endless dance of universal entropy. The sheer volume of data, the constant exposure to the galaxy's inherent fragility, was a form of perpetual torment. His interaction with other tech priests became sparse and purely functional. He was an oracle, an interface, revered for his insights, but feared for his alienness. Viridian, who had once mentored Kalen, now saw him as a tragic necessity, a sacrifice willingly made for the greater good of Ethel's purpose. He pitied Kalen, but never truly questioned the path. The demands of galactic stability, as revealed by Ethel, transcended individual suffering. The younger Magos, those who idolized Kalen as the oracle of Ethel, sought to emulate his integration, pushing the boundaries of their own augmentics, eager to achieve a similar communion. They believed that Kalen was evolving, ascending to a higher state of being, closer to the machine god's pure logic. They saw not the tragedy, but the transcendence. But Magos Xerxes, from his fortified sectors, viewed Kalen's transformation with horror and disgust. He broadcast encrypted warnings, calling Kalen a demon engine, a living example of Xenocraft's corrupting influence. "Look upon him," Xerxes would transmit, his voice laced with righteous fury. "See what their god does to a son of Mars. It devours the soul, leaving only a husk, a puppet of alien filth. This is the fate Viridian offers you all." Kalen, if he heard these accusations, gave no sign. His existence was now beyond such mundane conflicts. He was merely a component, albeit a vital one, in Ethel's grand design. His purpose was to process, to calculate, to perceive the vast, intricate network of probabilities that governed the universe. He was the sentinel of statistics, the prophet of entropy, and the silent, suffering guardian of a galaxy that remained utterly unaware of his sacrifice. His burden was not glory, but the crushing weight of cosmic truth. He existed in a perpetual state of hyper-awareness, seeing not just the present, but the infinite tapestry of potential futures, each one fragile, each one fraught with peril. He was the living embodiment of the Cogitati Orbis's ultimate heresy and its most profound sacrifice, a soul willingly offered to an alien machine, not for power, but for the silent, thankless task of maintaining the cosmic equilibrium, an eternal monument to the ultimate price of forbidden knowledge. The Imperial punitive fleet, an inexorable tide of wrath, finally broke through the outer layers of XYLOS Prime's chronal echo field. What they found, however, was not the clear, definitive target they expected, but a bewildering, maddening enigma. Auspex readings screamed contradictions. Navigators reported impossible spatial distortions, and astropaths recoiled from psychic static that defied all known patterns. XYLOS Prime flickered on their screens, a ghost planet existing in multiple locations at once, its energy signatures fluctuating wildly, its very presence defying the laws of reality. Archmagos. Valerius, his faceplate contorted with frustration on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Herald, slammed a metallic fist on his console. "It is not cloaking, Inquisitor," he declared, his voice a low growl of static. "It is an illusion. Every reading contradicts the last. It is as if the planet itself is moving through subspace without a Geller field, yet without catastrophic consequence." Inquisitor Theron Rex, a grim silhouette against the tactical displays, remained unmoved. Then their heresy runs deeper than mere xenotech. They manipulate reality itself, a proof of their absolute corruption. Orbital bombardment protocols are ineffective against such a target. Prepare for planetary assault. We will burn them out, piece by piece. The decision was made. Wave after wave of Imperial assault craft, laden with Skitarii legions from Cyclopia Majoris, cohorts of Imperial Guard from nearby garrison worlds, and the fearsome Praetorians of the Adeptus Mechanicus, launched towards the flickering image of XYLOS Prime. Their mission: to land, locate the source of the heresy, and purge it with holy fire. As the assault waves neared, Ethel's defenses, guided by Kaelin's ceaseless processing, revealed their true, terrifying nature. The chronal echo fields intensified, not merely distorting reality, but actively weaponizing it. Incoming Imperial shuttles found their navigation systems failing, their trajectory computers feeding them impossible vectors. Some ships simply vanished, phasing out of reality as they hit pockets of extreme temporal distortion, their crews aging into dust or regressing into primordial ooze within microseconds. Others found their weapons systems malfunctioning, firing upon their own comrades, or simply turning inert, their machine spirits confused and terrified. The surviving transports, braving a storm of impossible phenomena, managed to punch through the outer layers and land on XYLOS Prime's surface. What awaited them was a nightmare. The planet, appearing as a desolate, frozen metal desert, was a constantly shifting death trap. Camouflage panels dissolved into thin air, revealing chasms that led into the planetary mantle, then reformed behind the advancing troops, sealing off retreat. Gravitational anomalies caused platoons of Imperial Guard to plummet upwards into the void, or to be crushed into pulp as gravity abruptly intensified. The air itself was thick with localized reality distortions, causing visions of demonic entities, phantom Xenos, and the Emperor himself, mocking and enraged deep within XYLOS Prime in the abyssal crypt. Viridian watched the holographic projections of the unfolding planetary defense. Kalen, his form a silent, iridescent column of light, pulsed with an almost frantic energy. He was fighting a war not of bullets and plasma, but of causality and probability, manipulating the very fabric of local reality to confuse and devastate the Imperial forces. Casualty projections for Imperial forces are exceeding 80% for initial waves, Lex Mechanic Frontis reported, his voice tinged with a grim satisfaction. Our chronal echo fields are proving exceptionally effective against their standard assault vectors. But the cost was immense. Ethel's ceaseless manipulation of reality was a titanic drain on XYLOS Prime's power grid. The ancient plasma converters glowed with a sickening, unstable yellow. Cracks, thin and ominous, began to appear in the obsidian walls of the abyssal crypt. The sheer stress of reality, bending, threatening the planet's geological stability. Kalen, the primary conduit, was suffering acutely. His iridescent glow flickered, and sharp, agonizing bursts of data feedback pulsed through his form, threatening to tear his mind apart. And then came the true threat. The Ordo Hereticus, Inquisitor, Lord Inquisitor Valerius Thane, who had joined the punitive fleet in transit. Thane was no mere zealot. He was a master of psychological warfare and an adept at detecting reality breaches. His cruiser, the Penitent's Blade, was equipped with a specialized psychic nullification field, designed to dampen and disrupt warp energies and, critically, temporal distortions. As the penitence blade broke through the outermost defenses, its null field began to suppress the chronal echoes, causing XYLOS Prime to solidify, to become a tangible, albeit still confusing, target. Thane's elite stormtroopers, backed by a formidable force of Adeptus Custodes, brought in due to the extreme nature of the threat, descended onto XYLOS Prime. These warriors were immune to the temporal distortions and psychic illusions, their resolve unbreakable, their auramite armor deflecting the worst of Aethel's reality-warping attacks. They moved with relentless precision, pushing towards the planet's core, their target, the central power conduits that fed XYLOS Prime's defenses, and ultimately, Ethel itself. Simultaneously, Magos Xerxes and his Purity Ascendant faction, seeing the imperial invasion as an opportunity to purify their world, launched a desperate internal offensive. They attacked Viridian's forces in the deep mantle complexes, aiming to disable the very power generators that sustained Aethel's defenses. "They are devils, brothers," Xerxes roared, leading his loyal Skitarii into the fray. "Let the Imperium purge them, and then we will reclaim our world in the Omnissiah's name." The darkest hour had arrived. XYLOS Prime was under siege from without, and torn apart from within. The Imperial forces, spearheaded by the unyielding Custodes and Thanes, ruthless stormtroopers, were pushing deeper. Xerxes's faction, fueled by righteous fury, threatened to sever critical power lines. Ethel's defenses, while devastating, were draining XYLOS Prime to its core, and Kaelin was on the verge of total system collapse. Viridian stood before Aethel, its iridescent glow now flickering, its silent hum growing erratic. He looked at Kaelin, whose body convulsed with agonizing data feedback, his optical arrays blazing with the desperate, final calculations of a machine fighting for its very existence. The cosmic sentinel was in peril, its purpose threatened by the very species it sought to preserve. Viridian knew, with grim certainty, that Ethel demanded a final, desperate act, a sacrifice that would either save its mission or condemn XYLOS Prime to utter oblivion. The time for subtlety and deception was over. The combined assault was relentless, a hammer blow from the Imperium, driven by inquisitorial zeal and mechanicus orthodoxy, coupled with the corrosive internal strife ignited by Magos Xerxes. XYLOS Prime, once a bastion of subtle deception, was now a beleaguered fortress, its impossible defenses cracking under the immense pressure. Lord Inquisitor Thane's null field projectors were increasingly effective, solidifying the planet's distorted reality. allowing the Adeptus Custodes and stormtroopers to penetrate deeper into the Forge world's ancient, labyrinthine corridors. Simultaneously, Xerxes's Purity Ascendant faction, fighting with suicidal fervor, managed to sever several key geothermal power conduits, sending critical sectors of XYLOS Prime into sporadic power outages and further weakening Aethel's reality-warping defenses. In the abyssal crypt, the atmosphere was thick with the stench of ozone and desperation. Ethel, its immense form shuddering, pulsed with an irregular, panicked light. The bioorganic conduits that connected it to XYLOS Prime's core systems strained, tearing in places, spilling glowing neural gel onto the obsidian floor. Dominus Kalen, the Nexus, was a silent monument to suffering. His entire form convulsed violently, his multifaceted optics flickering like dying stars, his body barely contained by its stasis field. He was experiencing the galaxy's unraveling in real time, the accelerating entropy as Ethel struggled and failed to maintain the intricate balance against overwhelming odds. His existence was a scream of pure data, unheard by any but the machine. Viridian, his augmetic mind racing, knew they were at the precipice. Ethel's immense power, though capable of reality-bending feats, was designed for subtle, long-term interventions, not for direct, sustained combat against a full Imperial fleet and ground assault. Its core function was to prevent cataclysms, not to fight them. The cost of its current defense was consuming XYLOS Prime, threatening to tear the planet apart. But Ethel, even in its agony, had one final, terrible gambit. Through Kalen, a final desperate data stream erupted, more raw and overwhelming than any before. It was not a prediction, but a blueprint. A blueprint for a localized reality distortion pulse of unprecedented power. This pulse, if unleashed, would not merely disorient or subtly alter. It would tear a hole in the fabric of space-time itself, focused precisely on the invading Imperial fleet. The blast would be catastrophic, utterly annihilating everything within its radius, and rendering a vast swath of local space uninhabitable for centuries. The cost, Ethel's data stream made clear, would be the complete and utter destruction of XYLOS Prime. The sheer energy required, the strain on the planetary mantle, would rip the Forge world apart, atomizing it in a final, cataclysmic explosion. Ethel itself, the ancient sentinel, would likely be destroyed, or at best, scattered into countless inert fragments. And Kalen, the primary nexus, would become the focus of this pulse, his very being vaporized as the conduit for such raw, unleashed power. Viridian stared at the data projections, his internal processors running countless simulations. The probability of success for the pulse was high, 99.99%. The probability of XYLOS Prime's destruction, 100%. The probability of Ethel's own destruction, 97.2%. It was the ultimate sacrifice, the final act of a cosmic sentinel, turning its own immense power inward to preserve the greater whole. A single focused act of planetary immolation to prevent a galactic purge of its kind, and potentially to create an anomaly that would forever deter future probing. There was no debate, no time for philosophical contemplation. The Imperial forces, spearheaded by Thane and the Custodes, were just moments away from breaching the abyssal crypt. Xerxes's forces had reached the outer access points to the primary core. Initiate final protocol. Viridian's voice was a whisper of static, yet resonant with absolute resolve. His augmetic hand moved with a terrible certainty towards the activation conduit. Prepare for total energy divestment. Reroute all planetary power to Kalen Nexus. All loyal personnel. Begin evacuation to designated deep void escape vessels. Immediate departure. This is a divine imperative. Panic, cold and sharp, rippled through the few remaining loyal tech priests. To abandon their world, their centuries of work, their brethren, for a suicidal gambit. But the will of Viridian, hardened by Aethel's cold logic, was absolute. The machine god sometimes demanded annihilation for the sake of higher order. Magos Velen, the commander of the Void Reavers, now returned and battered, gathered his remaining Skitarii Praetorians. They were to hold the line, to buy mere seconds against the advancing Custodes, while the last escape vessels were readied. He knew it was a death sentence. For Ethel, for galactic stability, he roared, his voice cracking with a mix of zeal and terror, as he led his few remaining forces to face the golden armored giants. Within the abyssal crypt, Viridian activated the final sequence. All of XYLOS Prime's remaining power, the geothermal conduits, the plasma generators, the ancient fusion reactors, every watt of energy began to funnel into the Kalen Nexus. The air crackled with raw energy. The ground trembled, not from external impacts, but from the immense internal stress of the planet itself. Kalen's form, already glowing, flared with an unearthly intensity, becoming a miniature sun, burning brighter than any star. His shattered optical arrays coalesced into a single, blinding beacon of pure light. He was no longer Dominus Kalen, nor merely an interface. He was the focal point, the living core of Aethel's final act. His physical form, his consciousness, his very soul was being atomized, transmuted into raw energy, the ultimate sacrifice. Lord Inquisitor Thane, breaking through the last defensive line with his Custodes guard, burst into the abyssal crypt. His eyes, burning with righteous fury, fell upon the impossible sight, a kilometer-wide sphere of swirling data, pulsing with catastrophic power, and at its heart, a being of pure light, a dying god. "Abomination!" he roared, raising his master-crafted bolt pistol. "By the Emperor, I will purge you." But it was too late. As Thane fired, the light from Kaelin's core pulsed one final, blinding time. The reality distortion pulse erupted not as a beam, but as a silent, invisible wave of pure, unbridled cosmic force. It expanded outward, consuming XYLOS Prime in an instant. The planet itself shuddered, groaned, and then, with a silent, catastrophic implosion, simply ceased to exist, collapsing inwards upon itself, tearing a localized, temporary rift in space-time. The Imperial fleet, orbiting far above, saw nothing but a sudden, impossible void where XYLOS Prime had been. Then, a blinding flash, a burst of energy that overloaded every auspex, every sensor, every psychic connection. The very fabric of reality around them warped and buckled. Ships were torn apart, not by weaponry, but by the instantaneous shifting of space-time. Many were simply erased, their existence folded into non-existence. The Iron Herald and the Penitent's Blade bucked violently, their Geller fields screaming in protest. Chaos erupted as the remnants of the fleet struggled to escape the dying echoes of the temporal rift. The sacrifice was complete. Prime was gone, annihilated. Ethel, its core, shattered, its purpose fulfilled in its final act, was presumably destroyed. And Dominus Kaelin, the silent interface, was utterly subsumed, becoming one with the destructive, stabilizing pulse, a martyr to a cosmic truth the Imperium would never understand. The greatest of heresies, the ultimate abomination, had unleashed its final, devastating act of salvation at the cost of its very existence. The void where XYLOS Prime had once burned was now a silent, swirling testament to its final, cataclysmic act. A localized space-time anomaly, an empty wound in reality, pulsed with residual energies, spitting out phantom echoes of the defunct Forge world. It was a cosmic grave marker, a monument to a forgotten truth, and a warning to any who dared to look too closely. The Imperial punitive fleet, once a formidable display of might, was utterly shattered. More than half its vessels had been annihilated, not by conventional weapons, but by the impossible forces unleashed by Aethel's final reality distortion pulse. The remnants of the fleet, crippled and disoriented, fled the system. Archmagos Valerius, his flagship a battered wreck, recorded the event with a chilling detachment. Planetary mass gone. Complete stellar collapse of local space-time. Anomalous energy signature. Unprecedented. XYLOS Prime. Purged. Source of heresy. Eradicated. His data was sterile, factual, yet beneath the cold binary, a profound, unshakable terror resonated. He had witnessed a world commit suicide, weaponizing reality itself, leaving behind a void that swallowed light and reason. Inquisitor Theron Rex, barely surviving the pulse in a heavily shielded section of the penitent's blade, was a grim testament to the horrors he had witnessed. His face was scorched, his augmetics fused, but his zealous resolve remained. XYLOS Prime is no more, he croaked into his voxcaster. But the heresy was far greater than we imagined. These creatures, they were tampering with the very fabric of existence. The Emperor's justice has been dealt, but the price was paid in full. He ordered a system-wide quarantine, declaring the entire sector exterminatus in all but name, a void to be avoided, a stain on imperial records. Yet, despite the absolute annihilation, Aethel's final calculation had included an escape vector for its most vital data, and for the few remaining loyal adherents of the cogitate orbis. In the agonizing moments before XYLOS Prime's implosion, Viridian, witnessing Kaelin's ultimate sacrifice, had overseen the launch of a handful of deep void escape vessels. These ships, mere specks against the collapsing planetary mass, were equipped with a rudimentary, highly focused version of Aethel's chronal echo technology, designed not for battle, but for silent, undetectable egress through the chaos. Their hulls were lined with exotic materials, a final gift from Aethel, capable of shielding their occupants from the worst of the reality-shattering pulse. Among the survivors were Magos Viridian himself, critically damaged, his augmetics barely functional, but his core processing units intact. With him were Magos Valen, the commander of the Void Reavers, his mind scarred, but his conviction absolute, and a handful of Lex Mechanics, Engine Seers, and Scitarii Praetorians, the last remnants of the Cogitate Orbis. Their escape was miraculous, a precise, calculated vector through the heart of the temporal anomaly, a needle threading through the eye of a cosmic storm. But their victory was Pyrrhic in the truest sense. They were utterly alone, adrift in the unforgiving void, with no home, no allies, and no source of power or resources beyond what their crippled vessels could provide. XYLOS Prime, their sanctuary, their forge, their repository of knowledge, was gone. Ethel, the cosmic oracle they had sacrificed everything to protect, was shattered, its silent hum replaced by the terrifying quiet of non-existence. However, Ethel had made one final provision. Before Kalen's ultimate sacrifice, the sentient construct had managed a final, massive data imprint. It had chosen Viridian and Valen, and a few select Lex mechanics as its final receptacles. Fragments of its vast computational matrix, highly compressed and encoded, were ghosted into their cerebral augmetics, directly linking into their deep wetware processors. These were not mere data files. They were living echoes of Ethel's algorithms, dormant within their minds, waiting to be accessed. They carried the seed of Ethel's purpose, its core logic of galactic stability, its understanding of entropy, and its ability to perceive the subtle, hidden threats to reality. The survivors were now forever changed, not just by their loss, but by their unwilling inheritance. They were living repositories of forbidden Xenos knowledge, their minds carrying a truth too dangerous for the Imperium to comprehend. Their destination was unknown, their purpose now reduced to mere survival, yet within them lay the dormant potential to continue Ethel's mission. The physical toll was immense. Viridian, his organic components failing, existed in a permanent state of stasis, his mind kept active by life support and the slow, internal processing of Ethel's ghost data. Valen, though physically intact, suffered from acute temporal disorientation, his perceptions constantly flickering between past, present, and probable futures, a lingering effect of Ethel's final pulse. The other Lex mechanics, burdened by their own data imprints, became withdrawn and taciturn, their internal processors constantly battling the alien logic now woven into their very thoughts. They were exiles, hunted pariahs, ghosts themselves, drifting through the darkness between stars. Their resources were dwindling, their vessels limping along on emergency power. They would forever be on the run, forever forced to hide their true nature, for the discovery of the Ethel seed within them would unleash a horror far worse than the fate of XYLOS Prime. They were the ultimate heretics, living repositories of alien intelligence, devoted to a cosmic purpose that transcended the limited anthropocentric vision of the Imperium. The Imperium, believing XYLOS Prime and its heresy utterly purged, slowly began to rebuild its shattered fleet. The truth of Aethel's cosmic purpose, the silent salvation it had offered, was lost to the void. All that remained was the chilling memory of a rogue forge world that defied reality, and a few broken survivors carrying the greatest secret in the galaxy, condemned to an endless, silent war against entropy, forever haunted by the memory of their burning world and the ultimate sacrifice of Dominus Kalen. The void of space, cold and indifferent, became the eternal home of the surviving remnants of the Cogitate Orbis. Their battered escape vessels, cloaked by the last vestiges of Ethel's chronal echo technology, became sarcophagi for a dying creed and a nascent, forbidden truth. XYLOS Prime was a forgotten memory, a phantom that no longer registered on imperial charts, its destruction a sanitized footnote in the vast, bloody annals of the Inquisition, merely another nest of heresy purged in the endless war for humanity's soul. Yet its legacy lived on, not in monuments or battle honors, but in the subtle, unseen influence of its scattered survivors. Magos Viridian, kept alive by sophisticated life support, his cerebral augmetics now a living archive of Aethel's ghost data, became the silent patriarch of this drifting diaspora. He was a vessel of pure information, his organic components largely vestigial, his consciousness perpetually swimming in the vast sea of Aethel's algorithms. His very existence was a constant act of interpretation, translating the alien logic imprinted within him into directives for their continued survival. He was less a leader and more a living guide, a silent oracle for the condemned. Magos Valen, the former Void Reaver commander, was his grim executor. Valen, whose mind still wrestled with the temporal echoes of XYLOS Prime's destruction, became the public face of their struggle. His command was ruthless, pragmatic, and entirely devoid of the traditional Mechanicus courtesies. He understood the desperate reality of their situation. They were alone, hunted, and their survival depended on absolute adherence to the calculated vectors of Aethel's ghost data. Under his leadership, the remaining Scitarii Praetorians, their loyalty now a chilling, silent fanaticism, were honed into an elite force of stealth and precision, masters of subterfuge and impossible infiltration. Their odyssey was a perpetual dance of evasion, guided by the minute, long-range predictions of Aethel's ghost data. Tiny whispers of probabilistic futures filtered through Viridian's tortured mind, They navigated the treacherous currents of the galaxy. They avoided patrol routes, slipped through warp lanes deemed too dangerous for conventional travel, and melted away from Imperial scrutiny with preternatural ease. They became specters, never lingering, never revealing their true nature. But Ethel's purpose was not merely survival. Even in its fragmented state, its core directive remained: galactic stability. And so, the scattered remnants of XYLOS Prime began to subtly, invisibly, fulfill that purpose. In their endless flight, the survivors encountered isolated Imperial outposts, struggling colonial efforts, and forgotten exploration fleets. They never revealed themselves. Instead, using fragments of Ethel's ghost data processed through Viridian's mind and relayed by Valen, they would perform anonymous acts of covert intervention. A malfunctioning cogitator on a vital mining station would receive an inexplicable, anonymous data patch, averting a catastrophic system failure. A forgotten orbital defense platform, deemed inert, would mysteriously reactivate just in time to repel a nascent orc raid. A struggling agri-world would find its crop cycles inexplicably optimized, its weather patterns subtly nudged away from destructive extremes. These were small, isolated miracles, easily attributed to machine spirits or acts of the Emperor by the bewildered Imperial citizens and tech priests who benefited from them. But each act was a precise, calculated intervention, a whisper from the ghost of Ethel, designed to maintain micro-level stability, to prevent small points of entropy from cascading into larger, galactic instabilities. The cogitate orbis was no longer merely observing cosmic decay. They were actively, silently, fighting it from the shadows. Their legacy was not one of glory, but of insidious, slow subversion. The Ethel seed within their minds subtly influenced their technology, their philosophy, and their very being. They salvaged derelict vessels and repurposed Imperial schematics, but always with Ethel's alien logic guiding their modifications. Their augmentics, while appearing functionally Imperial, contained hidden bioorganic conduits and temporal stabilizers that granted them uncanny abilities. They developed new, efficient data processing techniques, new methods of warp travel, and new interpretations of machine spirits that, unbeknownst to them, slowly began to seep into the wider Imperial Mechanicus through anonymous data drops, seemingly lost STC fragments, or the simple dissemination of advanced concepts picked up by curious explorators. These seeds of forbidden knowledge, carefully planted across the vastness of the galaxy, would sprout in unexpected ways. Distant forge worlds might, generations later, inexplicably adopt a peculiar method of reactor stabilization, or develop a strangely efficient form of cogitator logic. Explorator fleets might find themselves guided by an uncanny intuition that mirrored Ethel's foresight. Rogue tech priests, fascinated by an anonymous data packet, might embark on heretical paths of research, unknowingly tracing the lines of Ethel's algorithms. The tale of XYLOS Prime and the sect of the Cogitate. Orbis became a forgotten whisper, an unverified rumor among the deepest archives of the Inquisition, dismissed as another purged heresy. But the true legacy of Ethel, the sentient Xenos data construct and its doomed protectors, was a slow, persistent, and entirely unnoticed subversion of imperial dogma. They were the eternal ghost in the machine, quietly guiding, secretly maintaining, and inadvertently corrupting the very Imperium they sought to preserve. Their purpose, born of forbidden knowledge and sealed by ultimate sacrifice, continued to ripple across the galaxy, a hidden truth that would forever alter the grim, dark future, one subtle calculation at a time.